Okay, thanks for sticking with us. This is part three of the section on literature reviews. So with this, I'm going to talk about just some ideas and some things to consider when you're starting to assemble your topic, your information together, and sift through it and categorize it, as well as some tips on writing and some things to consider when you come to put it together. So here's some questions to consider. It may be that some of you need to look at having literature from other sources besides just education. If you have a topic that deals with, let's say, poverty or something to do with psychology, maybe something that's really intense, maybe even a topic that has some medical relevance, it's like autism. Maybe you need to have some literature from other sources to the extent to which you really go through those and understand them and use them. So don't just limit yourself to education if your topic branches into other things. That would be useful to know. So now step two here on this point two here is just, how can you start thinking about organizing what you've got? I've already given you some previous components there in the last part, but here's just some other ideas. You can think about what are the themes or categories that I need to discuss in order to make people understand, the big picture here, what's going on, and all the different components of this topic. What are the things that how should I categorize this? And this could be, maybe you need to have a section on the roles of teachers, and a section on the roles of parents, and a section on the role of the students, and or a section on the role of administrators. You could do that kind of thing, or you could have just categories based on things to do with education, or things to do with in class, out of class, things to do with running the building, things to do with managing the class. Maybe there's different components that way. So just give some thought to ways in which you could organize your topic around themes or categories. And maybe that you organize it around, again, competing theories or schools of thought, just to make sure that we know. You could tell us what is there known about one theory, and what's the evidence say about it, and then what does another one say, and what's the evidence say about that, and you can do a comparison of them as far as what's known or which theory maybe is better based on what the evidence says. Perhaps you have debates on issues, or you have debates between authors, kind of related to the schools of thought issue. But if there really are several lines of thought or lines of scholarship that are done, and they don't agree, or there's really areas of overlap or contention amongst them, you could talk about that. And maybe that you need to talk about your study in terms of just the way it's been researched to this point. Where you could have just a section, that you have in your literature review could be just a small section on the models or the methods that have been used to this point. Have people only done surveys and nobody's really collected much objective data, or people done interviews but not really done any surveys, or people got in-class data but they never really sat down and talked to anybody about their experience, or have people not done any follow-up studies about a particular topic, and so we don't know what happened long term. You can talk about what you observe here, as far as just how the issue that you and the sources that you have, how they've been how they've been studied up to this point, and if there's any contradictions in any of these things, you can certainly talk about that. So as I said, I think in part one, make your topic the central starting point, and then branch off from there. So what kinds of, again, think about what kinds of useful information you can extract from the articles about your topic, and then you can find ways to organize that later. But first get the information, and then you can start thinking about how to organize it. Always give some thought to how can the evidence that these articles present, about what works and what doesn't, and why, what kind of factors are shown to be important. What does the evidence say that can help you build a case for why your study is needed, or how your particular study can address an important misunderstanding or gap in our knowledge. And then you can always look for maybe you can borrow somebody's model for implementing a program, or trying something out. Maybe you can borrow someone's research questions, or you can borrow their survey questions, the interview questions that people have looked at used for a previous study. So if they tell you that, you can go ahead and use them. You can use somebody's variables. You can use somebody's measurements. What kind of how do they measure achievement or learning or intelligence or aptitude or something. You can use those and then just give credit for who it is. Or you can adopt somebody else's procedure and say, I'm going to use the procedure that so-and-so used and try it in my school, in my setting, and see if it works different. You can adapt any of these and sort of say, I'm basing it on what I've taken from this other study, but now I'm going to go through and see how I can adapt it to my school and my classroom, and change it for my students, and so that I can make it work better. So you can think about things like that. So now let's talk about writing, because this is an important aspect as far as actually, once you have this information, how do you actually get it down? One thing you can look at is, again, in the Cresswell chapter, he has a structure that you can use. You don't have to use this structure. This is just maybe an outline, or at least a first step you can think about in organizing what you've got into some kind of coherent work. So he suggests having an introductory section that just gives us some reorientation to the topic and what's going on. You could maybe introduce what you're going to tell us, show us how the review is organized, tell us about the important factors, the different sections that are going to be upcoming, so that we know what to look for. And then he suggests maybe you could have separate sections on your dependent outcome variable. What's the thing you're looking at, achievement, or some kind of behavioral modification, or graduation rates. What is your emphasis here that you want to talk about there? So you can have a section on what does the research say about things that affect your dependent variable, your outcome. And then you can have a section on the kinds of things you're looking at for your independent, your predictor, or your explanatory variables. What does the evidence say about those things? So if you have a particular program you want to implement, or some factor you think is going to be really the difference in between success or failure, or success or not so much success. What does the literature say about that particular concept, or that particular variable, or that particular use of a tool or pedagogy or something? What does the literature say about that? Then you can have a section that actually, if there are some studies that review or that examined your particular question, that actually did study what you're looking at, your specific relationship between your dependent, your variable, and your independent variables. If you have them, you can maybe look at the one or two studies that actually did maybe something similar to what you're doing. And then a fourth section could be to present some summaries of what you've learned. Again, the summary of what the literature says, and then have this section that tells us what's missing or what the gaps are, and the kinds of things that remain for future study, which of course should include what you want to do. So along this line, I've created this little grid here for you guys to use, and this is in the literature review folder. And this is another one of these optional things that you don't have to use, you don't have to look at. I'm not collecting it. It's just something that you can decide to use or not. And I've sort of based it on the Cresswell model that I just showed to you. So you can think of this as just a big table where you can make notes about individual works or themes, and they're coming up. But so let's say, hey, we have a section here. You can make a row of things related to your outcome variables, and then I made it a couple rows for anything about your predictor variables. And you don't have to have 3 predictor variables. I just gave you the space for it. And then there can be a row about anything that deals with relationships between your independent variables. And so then the columns up here are just some other things that might be helpful to you, just a checklist kind of things or categories that you could think about putting into. And so this first column could be things about characteristics or components. Maybe you can think of that as definitions or important elaborations of something. And so if there's anything about, say, components of your dependent variable, you could say, make some notes here, but which sources cover this, or what do the sources say? You could either put the names of the sources or the authors, or put some ideas from the article themselves, and just say, what are the kind of ideas that I would put here if I wanted to have something about what my literature says about the components or characteristics of my dependent variable. So just say, moving to the right now, let's say you have some articles that talk about competing schools of thought, or just as you're reading them you find that your articles are on different sides of the issue. You could, to the extent that they relate to your outcome variable, you could put it here. If they relate to your independent variable, you could put it here. This middle column can focus on causes and effects. What are they saying? In this case, what are the things that cause the outcome, or which things have an effect on the outcome? Anything about methods, or if they talk about what kinds of methods were used to study something, or if they talk about factors that it would explain, for instance here an outcome, what kind of factors are they saying actually shows why the outcome happen the way it did, you can make notes about that here. And then anything about gaps or deficiencies or design flaws or assumptions made, anything that's kind of wrong or a little shaky about the literature, you could put that here. So as I said, you don't have to do this. If you do decide to do it, you do not need to fill in all these squares and all these tables. So especially if you're not going to have any second and third predictor variable. But even if you just have an outcome in variable and one independent variable, you don't have to have something in all 10 of these boxes here. You can just make the notes of the ones that are most useful to you, or not. The last row here again has to do with if there's any studies that study the relationship between your dependent and independent variables specifically, that may ask a similar question to what you're asking and focusing on similar variables to what you're studying, but maybe in a different context or something, and you can talk about those things here. Again, if you want to, you don't have to. It's just up to you. So I just offered that to you just as a tool as like a worksheet kind of thing to make your own notes on. So in writing it, in general, people use what's thought of as a deficiencies model for the overall point of view, and that basically you're trying to see, well, what has been done and then what's not been done. Where is the literature good? Where is the literature not so good? So you can review studies that have addressed your problem, and then at some point, either as you're walking us through individual studies, but certainly at the end, you should tell us what's been missing, or where's literature gone wrong, or are they making bad assumptions, or have they drawn poor conclusions based on the data that they have? What do you think is wrong with the literature? And then, so I'm asking, at the end of your literature review, that you have a section like this that just sort of tells us what's going on and what's wrong with it. And then in that last section, you should also connect your study to these deficiencies by giving us some sense of how your study is going to address some of these shortcomings that you tell us about. Just a couple tips on style. Generally, the literature review style is more formal, not a colloquial, informal kind of discussion, and it's really just presents the information that you found and what it says. And it's not going to be going into your struggles and the process you went through to get sources and to locate sources and to sift through sources and to decide upon which sources were good and how you took notes and all that stuff. So, don't tell us about your process of how you got articles and that you read a bunch of articles and made your notes and organized your work and all that stuff. So don't talk to us about your search process and your organizing process and how your topic evolved over time. Because if you couldn't find something and then later you did find something, that's interesting to you and how you're learning about your topic. But the reader is just mostly interested in what you've finally discovered and what you learned. So when I get down to here, just come out and tell us what the articles have to say about your topic. So you don't have to go with the style of Smith said or Jones said, or I read an article by Smith and they said the following. Don't go into all that. Just come out and say what they said. Basically, make a claim, make a statement, and then you can use the citation to show what the source is. You don't need to say I read Smith's article and here's what they said. Just state what they said, and then you can give the citation at the end of the sentence or end of the paragraph to indicate that. So again, I think this is the third time I've said this, but make your topic the centerpiece of the review, and make your claims and the things you want to tell us the main organizing principles of the review. Basically, I ask people to use sections and to headers and this kind of thing, and it's okay to do that. Give us the header, and so we know what this section covers, and just make it explicit. Use the articles as the sources of the information that you're going to tell us, and they can support the assertions you want to make. So so we want to hear your voice and what you want to tell us, what you've learned, what you think is most important for us to know about this topic. We don't want to learn about all the individual authors and what they said and what they did as so much. You're going to tell us some of that, but you're going to present it as evidence for the claims you're making, rather than just again giving book reviews and book reports about individual articles. So I'm asking you, don't use the annotated bibliography approach. Don't write a scorecard for each article and discuss each one individually and go article by article and tell us how each one did different parts well and other parts not so well. We're looking for something that's more connected and thematic, more of a synthesis. Some people say if you have a paragraph beginning with an author or article title that's bad, and I would agree with that. So don't if you look at how what you end up writing, and if you're starting each paragraph with, I read an article by so and so, or an article that I read called such and such said the following. That's not a good style to go with. Make connections for us, the reader. Make things explicit so that we know what it is you want us to learn. If we have to sort of hunt around and try to assemble things ourselves and try to decide for ourselves what's most important, then that's harder. The job of the literature review is to just make sure that we walk away knowing what's most important. And as I said, we're asking you to be an expert on this. So write as someone who's an expert, that has knowledge, that's done their reading, that's done their homework. Take some ownership of it, and just present this as someone who's going to give us this tour of what you've learned and what's most important for us to know in this area. So that is it, and so I'll accept your questions and hope that you can post things on the discussion board, because the kind of things you're going to come up with will be questions that everybody else will as well. So I want to have the discussion board up for that. So with that, thanks, and I'm hoping that you have good luck with your drafts, and that you're able to give us some assessment of what you've learned. So thanks.